Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Quiet. This was one of the very first words I remember being cold, and in many ways, it's followed me my whole life. Growing up as a missionary kid in Asia, quietness was not something strange or unwelcome. It was woven into the fabric of daily life. Silence was a kind of beauty. I learned to slip my shoes off without making a sound, to lower my voice, and to walk through spaces gently without being heard. In many ways, the silence of Asian culture taught me that quietness has dignity. It wasn't awkward, it was honorable, and it formed me. When I came back to the US for college, that word quiet followed me, but this time, no one meant it as a compliment. Here, silence was often seen as shyness, as a lack of confidence, as incapability. In classrooms, at work, and in conversations, quiet wasn't celebrated. It was tolerated at best, misunderstood at worst. And so I learned that in one culture, silence was strength, and in another, silence often looked like weakness. That cultural tension has stayed with me in ways I'm still unpacking today, almost a decade later. It shaped the way I understand myself, and it shaped the way I understand the soul. Right now, we are in a podcast series on soul care, and one of the most important components of creating soul-restoring rhythms is one that we often overlook. It's silence. And the way we interpret silence in our own lives has a direct impact on whether we are compelled by it or if we have a tendency to avoid it altogether. Silence is not just about the absence of noise. It's the discipline of receiving zero input and instead paying attention to what is already within us. It's the willingness to sit with our questions, to stay present in the midst of uncertainty. Silence is the practice of listening to the things that may only speak when everything else quiets down. Things like our own desire, our own voice, and the voice of God. But here's the hard part. Before we can embrace the gifts of silence, we usually need to name why we resist it. Because for many of us, silence doesn't just feel like stillness. It feels like exposure. And so I want to invite you into a question I've been sitting with this week. What story does silence tell in your life? I could share dozens more stories of how the silences in my own life have been both a friend and an enemy. And I imagine you could too. So, how do you feel about silence? I've realized that it often depends on what we mean when we talk about it. For me, silence has carried different textures at different times. Sometimes it's felt like companionship, safe, intimate, a space where no words are needed. Other times it's felt like isolation, like being unseen or misunderstood. If you add judgment or secrecy to silence, it becomes cold, even punishing. But if you pair silence with empathy and gentle patience, silence begins to feel more like love. As a therapist in training, I'm learning not only to hold silence for others, but also to name my own narratives about it. And I've noticed every person I sit with carries their own story of silence too. For some, silence feels like home. For others, it feels unbearable. So I want to return that question to you. How do you experience silence? Not just in this moment, but across the story of your life. What was silence like when you were a child, a teenager, or within your family? How did silence show up with classmates, in church, or at your workplace? And today, what emotions rise up for you when you imagine sitting in silence right now? Because the truth is, the story silence tells in your life will deeply shape whether you're drawn towards it or whether you avoid it altogether. As I've been reflecting on these questions, I found myself journaling about why engaging these narratives and learning to befriend quiet is so important for our souls. And that's what I want to share with you here. 5 reflections on how silence can parent us in soul-restoring rhythms and even midwife us into deeper union with God. Number 1, silence removes our usual defenses. For many of us, busyness is more than just a schedule. It's a shield. We pack our days full, often without even realizing why. The meetings, the errands, the constant scrolling, the steady stream of noise, all of it keeps us moving fast enough that we don't have to notice what's stirring inside. As long as we're moving, we don't have to feel. But when we slow down, even just a little, the shield begins to drop, and the things we've kept hidden start to surface. This can feel terrifying because silence has a way of pulling back the curtain on what we'd rather avoid. Sue Monk Kidd describes it like this in her book, When the Heart Waits. In the spiritual world, the authentic spiritual life is born out of silence and waiting. But entering into the dark isn't easy. Fear of this step is a common spiritual phobia. We fear the shadows of our own wall. We're terrified of the things that bump against the night of our soul. That's why silence often feels so threatening. When we enter into it, we're stripped of the things we usually rely on, often without even realizing it, to hide from ourselves or from God. Silence leaves us face to face with the realities we try to dilute or numb. The grief we've been pushing down, the anger we've been denying, the longings we've been suppressing. In silence, the props are gone. No phone to scroll, no conversation to fill the space, no work to hide behind. And when the props fall away, we begin to notice what's been with us all along. It's like when you finally turn off the music in a room and suddenly hear the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, and the creak of the floorboards. These sounds were always there, but you couldn't hear them until the noise stopped. Silence works the same way with our souls. It doesn't create the hidden things within us. It simply makes them audible. Number 2, what rises often surprises us. When we stay with silence long enough, something surprising begins to happen. Beneath the surface noise of our souls, we begin to access a deeper calm. But often, the very first thing that rises isn't peace or clarity. It's discomfort, grief, resentment, anxiety, shame, loneliness. That's why silence can often feel so unsettling. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we've managed to outrun up to this point. And in that space, the questions start to rise. If I let myself feel this sadness, will it swallow me? If I admit my anger, what does that say about me? If I acknowledge my longings, will I have to change something I'm not ready to change? Ruth Haley Barton puts it this way. In solitude, our illusions fall away, and we see, sometimes with disturbing clarity, our competitiveness, our jealousies, our rage, our manipulations. We get in touch with our fears of loneliness and abandonment, fears of really loving and allowing others to love us, fears of our sexuality and how powerful it is in combination with our spirituality. When we are in the company of others, it's easy to project our fears and negative feelings onto them. When we are in solitude, we must claim these inner experiences as our own. And if we stay in solitude long enough, we become safe enough with ourselves and with God to say, yes, this is who I am. In silence, we encounter the reality of ourselves, not who we want to be, not who we pretend to be, not even who others think we are, just us, as we are. Number 3, this surfacing is part of healing. Here's the paradox. The very things that rise up in silence, the grief, the anger, the longings, the fears, these are not obstacles to our healing. They are the very places that most need our attention and care, the very places God longs to heal. I think of the Samaritan woman's encounter with Jesus in John 4. With so much gentleness and honesty, he leans in close, touching the very wounds she would rather keep hidden. But his pressing is never for the sake of shame. It's always for the sake of healing. Think about a physical wound. It can't be cleaned or restored until it's uncovered. In the same way, silence uncovers the places in us that most need God's presence. At first, it's easy to think that what rises within us in silence, the fragmented thoughts, the heavy feelings, the old wounds, will distance us from God. But in reality, these very things become the doorway into deeper connection and healing with Jesus. Pete Scazzero often says, pain is the stimulus. Pain is a signal pointing us to something in us that needs attention, something longing for God's healing touch. Our instinct, of course, is to run from the pain, to escape it, distract from it, or numb it. But the invitation of silence is different. It asks us to move towards it, to turn inward and downward, rather than outward and away. Pain will always try to push us up and out, but God invites us to remain, to stay in solitude long enough, to linger in his presence long enough, until something begins to shift, until a new way of seeing emerges. Number 4, there's an invitation hidden in the discomfort. If silence brings what's hidden to the surface, then the question becomes, how does healing actually happen? How does this new way of seeing emerge? It begins when we bring our whole selves to God. Silence creates space to bring our whole selves before him, which in turn creates space for the whole story to be told. And when the whole story is told, the Spirit has room to meet us, to heal us, and to gently rewrite or expand the narrative we've been carrying. Think of the Samaritan woman at the well. She showed up with her whole self, her shame, her woundedness, her thirst, her defenses. And in the same way, when we sit with God in the discomfort, all our unspoken narratives begin to rise. Sometimes they sound like, I'm wounded and I don't feel comforted. Or, God, where were you? Why didn't you defend me? Or maybe it's simply the ache of absence. You feel so far away. These are the raw and unfiltered cries of the soul. And if we remain with them in God's presence, he begins to deepen and expand the story. Silence gives God the opportunity to tell the whole story of what's going on in your own life and transformation. He joins us in our pain, and he begins to tell us the deeper truth about who we are and who he is. The invitation hidden in discomfort is this: to stay in the silence long enough to begin to hear the story that God is telling about your life. And number 5, over time, silence reshapes us. As we befriend silence, leaning into it and creating space for it in our lives, we begin to feel more at home with ourselves and in God. Ruth Haley Barton writes, one of the primary functions of solitude is to settle into ourselves in God's presence. Solitude is the only way to find ourselves again. And the longer we've been lost to ourselves, caught up in external stimulation, the longer it takes to find our way home again. The more space we make for silence, the less untethered and ungrounded we will feel in the midst of external chaos. Over time, we begin to feel truly grounded, a quiet, steady calm beneath the noise. So let me return to the question I asked earlier. What story does silence tell in your life? Does it feel like a friend or an enemy, love or loneliness, a companion or a threat? Wherever you find yourself, I want to invite you to turn towards it, because silence has a way of telling the truth, and truth is precisely the place where God wants to meet us. So to close, I want to share a prayer written by Ted Loder. O God, gather me to be with you as you are with me. Keep me in touch with myself, my needs, my anxieties, my angers, my pains, my corruptions, that I may claim them as my own, rather than blame them on someone else. O Lord, deepen my wounds into wisdom, shape my weaknesses into compassion, gentle my envy into enjoyment, my fear into trust, my guilt into honesty. O God, gather me to be with you as you are with me. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.